Hi, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. My dogs picked this moment to want to go outside. So anyway, I'll see if they can hold off for a little bit. Do you want to go ahead, Travis and John, you want to go ahead and get started now? Wait a couple minutes. What's the pleasure? We have a lot of people on the call, so.
Ready when you are.
Okay. So I'm Susan Miller, Director of the Tulsa Planning Office. Welcome and thanks for coming to our meeting tonight and spending time with us. We want to talk tonight really about infill development. The purpose of this meeting is to have a discussion on infill development in the city of Tulsa. As some of you know, I've talked to you over time. We are updating Planet Tulsa, and we're currently developing policies to address many issues in the city. Specifically, this conversation are going to be about those related to infill development. Your input on this topic will help us as we draft policies, which will assist in. These are long-term policies, but ultimately they will influence our day-to-day development review operations in our office and in the city. So infill development is a significant part of the comp plan update. We have looked at infill development trends. You'll see those. I'll go through the agenda in a minute. You'll see those. We also have dealt with a survey, and we'll give you some of the results of that, and we've held developer roundtable discussion. So this is, tonight we're meeting with neighborhood residents to talk about infill development as it relates to adjacency and infill in neighborhoods. So first I'll go ahead and introduce the staff that's on the call. So Susan Miller, that's me. Travis Hulse, he is the principal planner of our planning and design section in the planning office. Nathan Foster, who will be giving part of the presentation too. He's a senior planner in current planning. John Tankard, who's a senior planner in planning and design. Daniel Jeffries, I think he's manning our presentation. He is a senior planner in implementation. He is also our lead communications guy. So he's very creative in helping us get out information in all different kinds of ways. And then JT Paganelli, I'm not sure, is he on the line tonight? He is very instrumental in helping us with data and maps and carrying a lot of the details forward. So that is our team that has really contributed to the information we'll be sharing with you tonight. Let me talk a little bit about what we want to talk about tonight. If you want to go to the next slide. So obviously this is, I'm just sort of setting everything up for you. We have some really interesting information we want to share before we have a discussion. You know, a lot of things have changed. We have seen some trends that we want to share with you and the survey results. So we're hoping to get through all of this before we take significant discussion. But what we would like you to do, if you have comments or if you have questions as we go along, if you could put those in the chat function, and that we'll get to those at the end, or also if you want, you can just hold them and we'll talk about them in the end. But I want to let you know that John Tankard will be talking about an overview of where we are on the Planet Tulsa update. He'll also be showing some really interesting information on development trends in Tulsa, how we've moved more toward infill development. Travis will be giving you some results of the Housing and Neighborhoods Policy Survey, and which I'm pretty sure some of you probably took that survey, so it's interesting to see what came out of that. And then Nathan Foster will end the information sharing session on some policy ideas, as well as just we want to talk with you about communications and how we can best communicate with you, what's most valuable to you as far as ways that we get information out. So that really kind of sets everything up. I'll go ahead. I also want to mention, but we want to mention as many times as possible so that everyone can know, we're calling this January, February, Planuary for us, because we have several initiatives that are coming together. Planet Tulsa is really the driving project right now. A lot of things are sort of tied into that, but we have a lot of meetings scheduled. This is the first of 30. So there's many opportunities to be involved with updating Planet Tulsa, and there's a full schedule of meetings on tulsaplanning.org. So please check that out, and a lot of them will probably have some of the issues involved that we're discussing tonight as well. So I'll go ahead and give it to John.
Okay, thanks, Susan. As Susan said, my name is John Tankard. I'm a senior comprehensive planner with the Tulsa Planning Office. I'm going to give an overview of comprehensive planning, where we've been as a city in terms of comprehensive planning, and where we're hoping to go in the future. So first, state statute enables cities, towns, and counties to develop and adopt comprehensive plans for the purpose of bringing about a coordinated physical development in accordance with the present and future needs of such area. Statute goes on to detail numerous different ways that can be manifest, and so I grabbed just 3 of the bullets that were in the statute. So a comprehensive plan can be used to help conserve natural resources of an area. It can help with fiscal responsibility and efficient expenditure of public funds. And it can promote health, safety, convenience, prosperity, and general welfare of the people in that area. Next slide. So prior to Planet Tulsa's adoption in 2010, the most recent comprehensive plan was adopted in 1976. At that time, the plan was not just for the city of Tulsa, but it was both for the city and the county. And the geography was split into 20-something different small planning areas. As we move forward in time, in 1989, the city of Tulsa's form of government changed to what we have today with the mayor and city council. And with those changes, people began to think about, well, maybe it's time for us to start dreaming again about what our plan should look like and move towards a new plan. So fast forward 16 years, and the mayor and city council in 2005 established a comprehensive planning process task force, and their charge was to develop a broad-based and inclusive process for the creation of a new comprehensive plan for the city of Tulsa. In 2007, Freganesi and Associates out of Oregon was hired to develop this plan and administer the process of developing the plan. And this is a quote from Mr. Freganesi in the Tulsa World in 2008, basically saying that most Tulsans want the same thing. They want a clear, unified vision of top priorities. They want basic services, new jobs, balanced transportation, and an understanding of which areas need resources and attention first. So that process led to the adoption of the final product in 2010 under Mayor Dewey Bartlett, who articulated that having this plan provided an opportunity to move forward in the city and to have a collective vision for what that future looks like. Between 2010 and 2016, there was some concern about how implementation was going, how much was occurring. And so with that in mind, a progress report was generated, which identified which actions had been completed, which ones had not, and which ones were underway. Dawn Warwick was the director at the time this was put out of long-range planning, and she really emphasized that that this was a document meant to clarify some of those questions that had arisen since the adoption of Planet Tulsa. So going back to the process that Freganesi and Associates undertook, it was a 3-year span, 2008, 2009, 2010, where they had substantial engagement through surveys and workshops, and they generated 4 development scenarios, which eventually led to the map that we use for land use planning. And all of that was adopted by the Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the City Council as well. The product of that process included a document called Our Vision for Tulsa, which kind of serves as a prologue for the comprehensive plan. And then the plan document itself had 5 chapters with numerous priorities, goals, and policies, as well as an implementation strategy. And then this is the map that is the land use plan map. This is one of the more functional pieces that we use in development review, and it illustrates what types of land uses are appropriate in different parts of the city. Next slide. So knowing that substantial community engagement occurred in 2010, which is not that long ago when it comes to community engagement for a plan like this. Many of the people who were involved in the development of that plan are still active in the community. And so we want to make sure we respect all of that input and that we treat this as an update, not a complete redo. But we also understand that there are aspects of the plan that did get out of date in 10 years, things like data and things like that. For community engagement, this time we began with in-person meetings, but obviously COVID has kind of upended meeting in person for quite some time now. Thankfully, we were able to take advantage of tools like Zoom to continue having meetings, and we intend to keep using Zoom and methods like that until we get the all clear to do in-person meetings again. And I'll go into detail about our upcoming Planet Tulsa meetings in a minute. We're also applying new perspectives to the comprehensive plan. So each chapter, we're evaluating what impact the policy recommendations will have on things such as health and wellness, equity and resilience, considerations for urban design and funding, as well as regionalism. How does Tulsa fit in to the broader Tulsa metropolitan area? We're using significant data analysis to make sure that we have a good understanding of the the landscape of the city and how different. Sorry, this slide isn't progressing for me. Okay, there we go. So we're using the resources at NCOG as well as in the planning office itself. We have a great deal of experience working with mapping programs and data, and so we're making sure that we get the full picture to complement the other aspects of our process. We're also putting. We also recognize that Tulsa doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there are cities all across the nation that have gone through many of the things we've gone through that we can learn from. We've evaluated comprehensive plans from more than 30 cities to see what we can learn, and we're trying to apply best practices as we can. Finally, I mentioned the concerns about implementation that arose after the adoption of Planet Tulsa, and that's something that we want to improve on with this update, making sure that the recommendations of the plan are clear, that we know what the strategies are, but more than that, we know how to implement them, who's responsible, when they should be pursued, if there are additional resources that are needed, or if there's more information that's needed. This is an example from the New Orleans comprehensive plan that we felt did a really good job of making the plan implementable. Next slide. So Planet Tulsa, as it was adopted in 2010, has 5 sections. That's land use, transportation, economic development, housing, and parks, trails, and open space. Our approach includes adding a few chapters, and we've got different approaches based on the chapter. So for the first 3, land use, transportation, and economic development, we are doing a basic update. So we're not adding new topics to the chapters. We are just going through and updating them within that same topic boundary identified in the original plan. For housing, the housing chapter of the existing plan, we are adding a neighborhoods component, applying kind of a structural change to the chapter. Similarly, for parks, trails, and open space, we're splitting it into 2 chapters. Right now, it really kind of functions as a catch-all for any policy related to the outdoors or the environment. And we felt that it'd be better to split them out. So we have a parks and recreation chapter that focuses on kind of the organized program outdoor spaces. And then the environment and natural resources chapter is more about those unprogrammed natural resources that we have in our community that we'd like to protect. We're adding 3 new chapters. First is communities. And this chapter is focused on civic engagement and how the city can best engage with people throughout the city, particularly those that we've we know we've had difficulty in the past successfully communicating with. Public services is a chapter that we're adding to make a place for city departments who did not get to have recommendations in the original plan. And then history, culture, creativity is a chapter which is focused on how the city can best support those historical, cultural, and artistic components of the city of Tulsa and Tulsans, that make this place what it is. And for each of these chapters, we would apply those 5 new perspectives I talked about. Next slide. So right now we are in the policy formation stage of the Planet Tulsa update. We began with scoping and capacity building, making sure we identified topics and trends and best practices, internal and external stakeholders. And in the policy formation phase, we've been engaging with those stakeholders. We've done participatory mapping exercises. We've done targeted topic engagement, such as the Housing and Neighborhoods Policy Survey, targeted audience engagement, and we'll be moving into broad public outreach and then plan development next. And once we get to there, we'll begin the review phase, having the public review a draft and provide feedback for us to incorporate. We'll have advisory committees of subject matter experts to help us as well. And then we'll have the final draft that we will take out to the public before pursuing adoption with the TMAPC and the City Council. So the upcoming engagement that we would love for anyone here and anyone you know to participate in, we're calling listening sessions. So there's actually 4 ways that you'll be able to be involved if, should you want to. The first of which is the real listening sessions, will go from January 19th to February 13th. And each chapter of the plan will have 2 listening sessions, one on a weekday evening, just like this, and one on a Saturday. And we did our best to choose days and times that should be most accessible for people. And for those of you that are particularly interested in infill, the things we're going to be talking about more today, I'd encourage you to look into the housing and neighborhoods and future land use sessions. If you come to these sessions, you'll be put into breakout meetings with staff, and you'll be able to convey your thoughts, your concerns, and your ideas in that format. Should you not be able to attend one of the Zoom listening sessions or prefer another way, we've set up basically a Planet Tulsa hotline where you can call and leave a voicemail. There's a prompt that'll ask you to say what chapter you're commenting on, and then you can leave your ideas with us. We've also set up a Planet Tulsa email address, and you could send us your thoughts through there as well. And finally, we have an online survey that can also be requested in paper form, and that can be accessed. Oh gosh, I've got chats coming up over the slides. And that can be accessed at tulsaplanning.org, and that's bilingual in English and Spanish. The voicemail, email, and surveys are open now, and they will be open through the end of February. And we will drop that PDF in the chat shortly. Okay, shifting gears a bit, I'm going to cover some development pattern, some data that we've uncovered through our comprehensive planning process, and then I will pass it over to Travis to talk about the survey. So in Tulsa in the 20th century, there were episodes of significant growth, particularly in the 20s and the 50s, maxing out in 1959 with a 10-year rolling average of 30,000 properties annually. Since then, we've seen continuous and fairly steady decline in the total number of properties built each year. But we've seen some variation in the type of development. That's what we're going to get into now. So in the 1980s, we saw today we have around 14,000 properties that were built in the 80s. And of those, about 12 or 13% are what we considered infill development. So our definition for our purposes was a property that gets developed where the surrounding properties are 20 years old or older. That would qualify as infill. If the surrounding properties average 20 years or less, we'd consider that greenfield. So moving into the 1990s, we see a pretty sharp decline in the total number of properties, but we do see an increase in the percentage of infill development, moving up to about 1 in 5 projects. By the 2000s, we see slower decline overall, but some decline still. However, our infill development jumps up to about 2 in 5 properties at this point. Next. And for the 2010s, this data set includes data from 2010 through part of 2019. That data set was not complete when we put this together, but we see a continued decline. However, now about 1 in 2 projects are what we would consider infill development. And when we noticed this trend, it really emphasized to us that, and many of the individual cases we saw come through the Planning Commission, it emphasized that we really needed to have this as a focus when we're doing this update to the comprehensive plan. So with that, I will pass it over to Travis to talk about the survey.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Housing and Neighborhood Survey results. And this is really just one component of the comprehensive plan that John talked about. So as part of the comprehensive plan update, one of the very important things, one of the most important things that we do is reach out to the people who live in these neighborhoods, work in these neighborhoods, have some sort of investment in whatever way, shape, or form that takes. And so, just one of the many things that we have done thus far is used a survey to help really reach a broad audience and ask some questions specific to the housing and neighborhoods topics. And, again, that's just one chapter of the comprehensive plan. There's many, many chapters to the comprehensive plan. And so in an effort to really distribute that survey far and wide, I'll say that we spent a lot of time utilizing our social media during the time of the COVID pandemic. You may have seen it go out in our citywide press release, various news stations who covered that. We also distributed paper copies where we thought we would be able to really reach as many people as possible, recognizing that not everyone has access to the internet and it may not be the first for all. But I'll say that we felt very confident and were happy with the results of just the overall response and participation in that. So that was open from July to October. We did close that survey, but really the survey is just kind of one piece of our engagement. This is another example of that and having a conversation with you all. So next slide. This gives you an idea of how many participants we had and really kind of where those participants live and where we started to see a lot of participation across the board. Citywide, we saw participation in those darker blue areas, really just signifies where we had a lot of activity. Lighter blue would signify that we had, a few people participate, but maybe not as many in some of those darker places. And so, this is even important information for us as a planning office. We want to be able to reach everyone. And although a survey is productive and has allowed us to make contact with over 1,500 people, there's opportunities that we recognize in being able to reach out. And in fact, that was one of the questions as a part of the survey, and something that we'll talk a little bit more about tonight is how we can do a better job communicating and reaching out in these various efforts and initiatives coming out of our office. So in the next handful of slides here, the next 10 or 12 slides, I'm going to spend a little bit of time showing a few of the results from the survey. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but on that previous slide, there was a link, and we'll make sure to make that available to where you can access a full summary of the entire survey at your leisure, be able to look through that a little bit. So again, while we were happy with the amount of people who participated, this gives you a sense of also some opportunities that we've seen citywide, where we've had a lot of participation thus far in this process through the survey. We also want to maybe deploy some other tools to reach out to other groups who may have not been able to participate. So in addition to the survey, through our comprehensive plan process, we've reached out to over 150 different community groups. We've also reached out just in general public feedback from various listening sessions, emails, phone, surveys of other kinds. And so, you know, this, I think, tells us that we've got a good snapshot of a lot of these issues and topics and some new things to be looking at. So for the folks that did participate, this gives you kind of a easy breakdown of who those people were. We had a lot of people participate across in very diverse groups, and I think that's one of the things that is important to us as a part of this survey, and John talked a little bit about. On the next slide, you can see where we've as well had additional participation, just as broken down by who have, how long they've lived in Tulsa and their ages. I think that we were happy to see that we have a lot of variation here, both across the generations, as well as maybe people who are native to Tulsa, some of the short timers like myself who have been here for around 5 years, and kind of in and around between. Again, this isn't to say that, you know, we've done a perfect job of talking to everyone, but we've been satisfied with the results thus far and hope to build off of these as we go along and continue these conversations. So for many of you who participated in the survey, some of these questions are going to look familiar. I'm going to cover just, I think, 3 or 4 questions that we asked in the survey that are really specific to the topic of infill development, specifically residential development within existing neighborhoods that we're talking about tonight. The survey also covered things like affordability, neighborhood identity, your perspective on these benefits as well as concerns of infill. And then we're going to end talking about kind of that communication piece a little bit. As we get into this, I just wanted to kind of briefly explain what you're looking at here. Many of these maps are going to be similar in their presentation. So the various colors kind of along there at the bottom of the screen, you can maybe follow along and see what the response was to this particular question, which was to let us know of your opinion regarding the following statement. It is important for new housing to look like the housing around it. So for those areas that you see shaded in red or orange, what that suggests is that for all of the people who responded within those geographic areas, so they live within these kind of areas, their average sentiment to that question was that it's, you know, somewhat important or very important. And then areas highlighted in blue, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, it is either somewhat important or very important. So it's not to say that everybody responded in the same way in an area that's blue, for example, or an area that's orange or red. It's an average of the responses that we've heard. So we'll continue to use this information and really drill down at the neighborhood level and start to understand, okay, what are maybe the differences of one neighborhood to the next? And I think that what lesson here we're kind of showing again is that we recognize the diversity of Tulsa, and we want to embrace that within the developed policies of the city that we'll find within the comprehensive plan. So we have some work and to really start to get into this a little bit more. One of the questions that we asked that was really specific to the design and kind of just how things look, the style of residential development in existing neighborhoods. We asked how important it was for a number of factors, architectural style, height or size of structures, the decorative elements, how close structures or buildings are to one another. And the zoning code does deal with some of these, not all of them. Many of you may be familiar with some of our historic preservation neighborhoods who have a specific tool, an overlay for those areas that require certain design standards to be followed, but not many of our neighborhoods in Tulsa do not have what you might see in private covenant restrictions and those types of things. So again, as we think about what is important to infill, whether a benefit or a concern to neighborhoods, we can really use this information to help us understand from one neighborhood to the next if there's opportunities to look at some of these different factors, whether it's style or the size and those types of things. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have thoughts or just general comments, throw those in the chat box. While you're listening to John and I talk here, we're going to get to a point where we really get to open up and chat a little bit. So if you want clarification on any of these things, please put those in the chat so we can make sure to circle back. So another question that we asked was, again, back to maybe the benefits of infill development. This is a picture, a graphic that tells citywide what we saw broadly. I think generally the survey showed that there's a lot of interest in the potential benefits of infill development. All of the responses had greater than 50% of the people who participated said that they were either very interested or somewhat interested in these benefits. In particular, the top three in response to this question that we pulled out in the next slide were first and foremost the replacement and rehabilitation of older, poorly maintained homes. Secondly, a more efficient existing infrastructure. And then third, farmland and green space outside of the city can be preserved. So those were kind of the top three, and you can maybe see if how things change and shift a little bit based on each response. The map highlights a little bit different, looks a little bit different. And so there's some nuances there that we can really learn more about the level of interest by neighborhood. And then on the flip side of that, we kind of asked, potential negative aspects of new housing in existing neighborhoods. So, broadly from a citywide perspective, again, I think the number one concern that we saw was the loss of existing neighborhood trees. Second to that was new housing being too other housing. And then the third was displacement of current households. And these citywide, these are citywide results again that we're looking at here, but can really vary from neighborhood to neighborhood and be important for us to be looking at. So this gives you a sense of how that looks from question to question or from factor to factor, maybe which of those is of greatest concern versus, which of those is of least concern. And so all of it's important. All of it will help inform us as we move forward. Wanted to highlight this portion of the survey that we also asked questions regarding communications and outreach. This is a perfect example of what we're doing here tonight on a Zoom call. We have, it looks like 62 people on this call. That's great. We wish there were more, but we recognize that for some people, getting on a Zoom call just is not convenient. It's challenging for me as a dad has 4 kids at home running around screaming right now somewhere in another room. So it may not be my first choice, but one of the questions that we really wanted to know is in terms of just overall outreach, we also asked public development initiatives, how do you feel you access that information related to those initiatives in your neighborhood? This is maybe kind of a sobering picture. So both public and private development, I would kind of take this to say that people have a hard time feeling like they can access whether it's public or private. We're maybe doing a little bit better on the public side of things, not so great on the private side. And, you know, again, that's very valuable information to us. We've recently held a roundtable sessions of sort with the development community and have had a conversation. And these are results that we share with them. We want to make sure that they're fully aware of the challenges that many people living in these neighborhoods feel, that they don't have access and aren't aware of some of these projects. And that's important to share with them. So while we're presenting these results to you, we also present them to many others who are maybe sitting across the table and a part of this conversation. So the next slide, and I think we're kind of getting to the end here of what we wanted to talk a little bit about, which is survey results, shows you that overall picture of the question that we asked, which is, how do you prefer to learn about things concerning your neighborhood? There's a lot of different ways that can be utilized. Social media has really been a go-to this day and age we're living in. Email and online formats are certainly a little bit easier for us to manage. But, you know, I think there's still some interest in having those face-to-face interactions, physical email. The one there in the middle is saying through my neighborhood association. So we do have connections through our Working in Neighborhoods department to reach out to neighborhood organizations and spread the word that way through Nextdoor. We're trying to build that more and more and really try to understand how we can do better. And having these results, we can look and understand for a certain geography what is most preferred, and, you know, maybe what we can do to be creative as we know about projects coming up, and something that we could potentially share with those applicants bringing private development projects across the desk in our office. This is, you know, where we can start to have that conversation and let people know the best way to get in touch with the neighborhood that their project may propose. So these are our current strategies, and I kind of talked about all of these. I'm not going to spend too much more time here other than just to say it's important for us, again, to know which ways you would prefer and how we can start to think about that. What we can do is important for our office as we are young and new in this endeavor in the Tulsa Planning Office, but want to do good, better, you know, everything that we can. So kind of to wrap up a little bit in my section, hopefully I didn't ramble too much for everyone. Wanted to just ask a poll of you real quick to maybe even get an answer a little bit here to this meeting, and that is, how did you hear about this meeting? Daniel is our communications guru. He's doing as much as we can possibly ask him to do through our social media accounts and newsletters that are going out that you can register for. We've also contacted neighborhood associations. We had things, news, TV, radio, and otherwise. So if you wouldn't mind responding to this, and you can check all that apply. If you heard of it or caught wind of it in multiple ways, it'd be great to know, so we can be aware of what is most successful and how did you hear about this meeting. Give everybody maybe 30 seconds or a minute to fill that out, and then I think I'm going to turn the rest of the time over for some discussion and kind of follow up for some of the comments in the chat to Nathan Foster in the office.
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, we'll give everybody a little bit of time to answer that poll question before I dive into the next topic. Also, maybe while everyone's answering the poll, I can go ahead and kind of review a few of the questions that people have dropped into our chat box that aren't related necessarily to our discussion questions. One of the things I noticed right away, Ed, you put a comment in here about activities and processes continuing during the plan development. There won't be any disruption to the current process for folks pursuing any sort of rezoning or development plan through our typical process. We'll continue to do that throughout the development of the new plan. And obviously, once that adoption occurs, we'll start to incorporate those new things into our development review and process. Craig has asked about the development numbers included in new construction only, or also including major renovations. John, I think that was pertaining to your slide.
Yeah, so the data from the county assessor, to my knowledge, shows the original construction date of the project and not the data significant renovation. So if you're considering renovation as a form of infill development, then that would likely increase the percentage of projects that would be considered infill development.
Let's see, Mark, on your question, I think we've addressed that. Everybody, if you haven't seen yet, I did put the PDF for the listening sessions into the chat box now. So it's available if you guys want to download that, just so you have the overall schedule for when this is going to occur. And then Aaron had a question about whether these could be available for viewing in ArcGIS. I would recommend maybe at the very end of this, we'll put our presentation and our contact information up on the screen. You might email us directly about that question. I think we could probably work with you on some of that information. I think that's all of the actual questions that were in there so far. Oh, we've got some more coming in here. Guys, do you think we should, do you want to, some of these are related to the discussion topic. I don't know if we want to try and go through these right away, or we can move on into this. So let's see.
I saw one from Jessica that was about the survey results.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and Ed had another question. It looks like he popped in right before. The residents and neighborhood associations on notices for proposed neighborhood developments. We send out notices for all of our public hearings related to Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. That's including any sort of rezoning or major development plan. The Board of Adjustment also would send out any notices for things like special exceptions on developments or any type of variances. The one thing that proposed new developments wouldn't receive, or neighborhoods wouldn't receive notice on, would be anything that's being done by right or just by a permit. If they were going through the process they needed to and they already had the correct zoning, those don't require additional notices. Jessica's question on the survey was to address the huge disparity along race and owner-renter classes in the survey results / public input thus far. How will TPO be adjusting their approach for soliciting input? I'll see if...
Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick.
Okay.
You know, I think we continue to adjust. We're adjusting every day, I feel like. I think we've seen some significant improvement in participation, just overall being able to read, being able to reach a lot of those audiences that you mentioned, Jessica, and I'm trying to go up to your question, along the race, owner, renter classes. So, you know, some of the things that we've done specifically, we've developed a newsletter. Daniel can chime in and talk a little bit more about this. We developed a newsletter to go out, you know, through the neighborhood organizations to reach people and just to individuals. Anyone can sign up for that via email, recognizing that some have access, utilize their email access to communicate. We try to identify those neighborhoods and go to any public library, churches, any organization that will honestly listen to us and ask them to help distribute paper copies, to distribute, you know, just letting people know how we're trying to get the word out on our website. We'd love for people to follow along and kind of get used to the website as being that hub of information, but again, trying to not just force the way that we do things on people and helping to answer and engage them in ways that are comfortable and convenient to them. Those are a couple of things that come to mind. And with a comp plan, I think, you know, I've seen a list of all of the organizations that we've reached out to just on the housing and neighborhoods end of things. And we are doing, you know, anywhere from the small 1-2 person organization to large corporations, having conversations with them about that thing. So I don't think we have all of the answers yet, and we're still working on that, but we really try to customize our outreach and our ability to communicate with people project by project. So it's not just treated the same every single time. We can be very specific and particular about how we do that. So Daniel, I don't know if you want to add anything into that.
I would add that we're trying to add some language access to our materials as well, creating surveys and documents in Spanish. This housing and neighborhood survey that we're reviewing the results of, we worked with some local partners to have it translated into Zomi as well. And each community has different ways that they want to be engaged. We're still trying to learn the best ways that each group wants to be communicated by. And, you know, this is something that is going to continue to evolve as the organization grows and more people get plugged in.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, just real quick. So for the housing and neighborhood survey, just as an example, I think this is the first thing coming out of the city or organizations that was translated, English, Spanish, Zomi. We tried to get Hmong, we couldn't get there. We're having some challenges, but to be totally honest, being it translated into something like Zomi, I think we had very little participation. Maybe 1 or 2 people participated that way. So maybe a survey is just not the thing, it's not the answer. So to Daniel's point, we're trying options, different methods to see how we can be successful, and we're learning.
Great. So I think what we'll do is we can continue moving down these questions. And it does look like some people are beginning to respond to the questions that are on the screen through this slide. So I want to frame that up just a little bit for you guys before we get into starting to respond to some of those. John mentioned earlier the process that we've undertaken to update the comprehensive plan, and really the outcome of that plan is going to be these priorities or these goals that we're going to establish in each of these particular subjects or topics that we then look to try and adopt more policies and actions that we can take to implement those as we move forward after the adoption of this plan. So what you have in front of you is based on a lot of the information that we've already received and that we've worked on up to this point, one of our proposed goals for the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan. And really you're the first group we're putting this out in front of, and we're hoping to try and start to gain that feedback that we've talked about is going to be going on throughout the entire month of January and then some of February. So what you see is the initial goal, which we've said is Tulsa's neighborhoods are recognized for distinct characteristics and development occurs with sensitivity to local context. In addition to that, we've shown you some of the proposed strategies that within our office we've developed to show how we might start to strategize against that goal and implement some of the recommendations that we make. And then we're asking you guys to add to that and tell us if there's other things beyond what we're putting on here that come to mind or that you recognize could be adopted by the city of Tulsa to assist with this issue. The things that we've listed here, the neighborhood toolkit is a new development of our Tulsa planning office that's going to assist with neighborhoods and making sure that they're properly registered with the city of Tulsa to receive information as it's available and as things are occurring within their area. The neighborhood character overlay is actually an adopted part of our zoning code that allows us to go into specific geography and potentially tweak by removing or adding additional zoning restrictions to how those properties could be used. And that helps really to tailor some of the ideas that neighborhoods are presenting to us as we get some of this feedback. Historic preservation overlays, Travis touched on briefly, that's been in place for quite a while in the city of Tulsa, and there's several neighborhoods that benefit from those protections. Those things are subjected to the Historic Preservation Commission, whether it be remodeling or the construction of new homes in those neighborhoods, to ensure that they comply with a certain set of design standards and guidelines that meet whatever that historic character is within that neighborhood. And then the last one here is probably the most abstract of the strategies, and that's appropriate transitions being provided between non-residential and residential uses. We often hear concerns from neighborhoods as the commercial corridor along the main street is attempting to grow and how that is going to mesh with the neighborhood and the existing homes that are there. And so as we start to strategize about what we can do to better address those issues, these are the questions we'd like to pose to you all. And so it does look like we've got a pretty good amount of responses already on this topic. And so if we kind of want to go through each of these, I don't know if is someone else kind of watching the chat to see all of the responses coming up. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm going to find my way to where we were. Got some questions. First of all, I appreciate the amount of responses. Looks like we're getting a lot of feedback from you guys. Looks like the first one that I see that comes up is related to this particular goal is regarding trees. I think that that's a pretty common concern we've heard from neighborhoods, in that mature trees are very frequently being removed for the purposes of either new home construction or new development. And there's many efforts, I believe, underway at the city to try and start to address that particular issue, as well as the option of including new policies within our comprehensive plan. But we have done an assessment of our tree canopy in conjunction with Uplift Trees, and we're trying to get a pulse on how that looks now and what are some of the efforts that we could do to potentially address that concern. You guys pulling any of these other ones out? You want to help me kind of read through these? We can see. Carrie, you had a comment about historic preservation specifically and how a neighborhood could get on that list. There are some qualifications to make a neighborhood eligible for historic preservation. I would say if you think that there's a potential for your neighborhood to be included in that, we would always advise you all to reach out to our historic preservation officer with the Tulsa Planning Office, and they can begin to make that assessment and help you understand what those qualifying conditions might be. Mark, your question on the website and which would be best for receiving information on the notices of meetings. So the public meetings that our office handles, I would absolutely recommend everyone just deal with the Tulsa Planning Office website. So if you go to tulsaplanning.org, you can find links to the current agendas for the Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, as well as the local Board of Adjustment. That would give you links to anything that's on their agenda, as well as provide you with details about what those requests are for. We do typical notices on all of those types of meetings that were posted in the presentation earlier, such as mailings to neighbors within 300 feet and posted signs on those properties. So that gets those immediate neighbors informed about it. But for those that are just interested in what's ongoing and what might be happening, you can always check in our website to find that information. And I think we're constantly working to find more opportunities to keep neighborhoods informed better.
Nathan, I can take a couple.
Okay.
Okay. Did we answer Aaron Griffith's question about downtown? I don't think we did.
Oh, I don't
Okay.
think so. I think I skipped.
Travis, I thought maybe that would be addressed through the downtown housing study.
Yeah, I was just kind of reading through that, trying to unpack that in my mind a little bit, Aaron. And some of these, so maybe I should say too, all of the comments, questions, I think we'll maybe want to come back and even have some conversations with individuals a little bit. So as far as have we examined the impact of policies that assisted, even subsidized, some cases, high-end luxury lofts? I'm trying to kind of to Aaron, so I apologize if this doesn't get at the heart of your question. John mentioned we recently completed in early part of 2020, a downtown market study where we had a consultant come in and look at downtown and some of the surrounding neighborhoods at kind of what the 10-year demand projections look like. And it broke it down by income levels, starting at affordability, up through workforce, all the way up to luxury. And so some of those things are definitely considered and addressed within the housing study specifically. That's also available on our city website. And if you give me a minute here, I can find the link so I can send you directly to it, so you don't have to try to find it, and maybe Daniel or someone else can do that as well. But that's you bring up, even the point of affordable housing gentrification. This is something that is of particular interest with the mayor's office creating a housing policy director position. Becky Gligo was in that role. She's just recently moved over into a new role with Housing Solutions, but a lot of that work does continue, and there are some initiatives ongoing, specifically in downtown, looking at some of those things. So again, roundabout way, probably not answering the heart of your question, but be happy to talk more one-on-one about that.
For Craig's question about the Arkansas River corridor, so one thing that's been very fresh on our minds when thinking about the Arkansas River for the plan update is the flooding from 2019. And so we are considering ways to have policy recommendations to enhance resilience in and around the Arkansas River corridor. The land use classification for the Arkansas River corridor is staying. We're not looking to change that.
I think there will be, just to add to that, John, I think the policy goals and things that will impact the Arkansas River corridor will definitely live probably in several chapters because of its kind of nature of being both parks, recreation in some areas, but also the environment and natural resources component.
Yes. As far as the survey results being released, Daniel, you are working on a dashboard, is that correct?
The dashboard is up right now. So if you visit tulsaplanning.org/housing results, you can take a deeper look into the questions and responses. We won't have the mapping features available on there through SurveyMonkey, but it does allow us to show results of individual questions. And that link is also toward the end of this presentation too. So don't worry if you didn't catch that, but it's tulsaplanning.org/housing results.
Yeah, and I think there's a question later on about being able to look at those results at the neighborhood level. So we are looking into that through Tableau. We could potentially do that to where it would be available to kind of interact with the results a little bit and kind of hone in on a specific area and see what those responses look like. I think that's something that we've developed pretty close to the point that it could be released, but certainly something we want to make available for people that have access to.
For Aaron Griffith's question about community benefit agreements, so I mentioned that we've been analyzing peer cities and their comprehensive plan, and that is a very common idea that we are looking at recommendations about pursuing those and better understanding how those can fit into the state statutes that we work with and local ordinances as well, and see how we can move towards something like that. Absolutely. And let's see. The tree canopy survey, so this is for Aaron as well. So that's actually, we've been using the Up With Trees master plan. So we could probably put a link for that in the chat as well.
Nathan, we also got a question on Facebook from Josh. Seeing that most Tulsans have been Tulsans a long time, do you think that skews the answers to maintain status quo versus new folks who might prefer to have more dense infill that would allow them to move here?
That's a very good question. I think when we talk about infill especially, but anytime we consider new development, we have to make considerations for what existing neighborhoods want and then what an appropriate development is for what we're talking about. And so it's interesting to bring that up because I don't believe we probably got results from that demographic. And Travis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but folks who weren't from Tulsa who might have given us different input when we were talking about a survey. And honestly, maybe a good way to address that would be to try a different survey for people who weren't actually living here or who were, focused from out of town. It's an interesting dynamic to try and approach just who that particular market might be and how do you navigate that outreach. But I agree with the idea. There might be a differing opinion there.
There is some variation, of course, given the predominance of people who've lived in Tulsa for a long time. We saw a lot of positive responses for things like accessory dwelling units and duplexes, for example. So there is, it's not that the people who have lived in Tulsa for a long time want everything to stay the same. There seemed to be a pretty good understanding that growth can occur so long as it's sensitive to existing context.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we got a lot of feedback and we're exploring that in other meetings coming up with our missing middle discussion. And as a result of that downtown housing survey Travis mentioned earlier, there is a desire to try and start mixing some different housing types and adding density to some of these existing neighborhoods, even from those that were already in those neighborhoods. So there's a question here about neighborhood character overlays, including allowing for ADUs, fourplexes, etc. That kind of is a good spin from where I just was talking about our missing middle discussion. There has been discussion recently as a result of the results in the survey and as well as the housing study to try and pursue some overlays that may allow for some of those housing types near downtown neighborhoods. Some folks here may have participated in conversations about that at a different time. But yes, the overlay gives you the ability to essentially write standards that may work in a certain neighborhood, but maybe you don't want to adopt citywide. Those would definitely be potential things that could be done, would be allowances of those additional housing types. I will mention that we did make amendments to our zoning code just last year, maybe even earlier this year, to begin allowing for accessory dwelling units in conjunction with detached houses or single family homes as a special exception within some of our existing neighborhoods. And that was previously something that wasn't allowed at all. Going back to when the zoning was changed in 1970 for the city of Tulsa, there was a real outright ban on adding any sort of accessory dwelling units to lots. You were restricted to only one. So we've kind of started to unravel that, and that was the first step, was making those amendments to our zoning code to allow people to at least ask for permission to install those in there or on their lot when it's appropriate.
Did we answer the question from Carrie about how a neighborhood gets on the historic preservation list?
Yeah, I just kind of explained that there was criteria and that. Okay. If there's interest from a neighborhood, and this kind of relates to Pam's question I'm seeing here about the historic neighborhoods in town that aren't in the districts. I mean, that's very true. We have many neighborhoods in town that qualify for historic preservation and that would be eligible to eventually adopt one of those preservation overlays. It's just, there is a process in which that adoption has to occur. And obviously the neighborhood would be strongly engaged if that were something that was going to change. It is a pretty large departure from what would be a typical development process in a neighborhood. If someone wants to make any alterations to their home, change out windows, change roofing, all of those become subjected to the Historic Preservation Commission for those guidelines. And so as you go, it's typically a rezoning, or it is a rezoning process to adopt a historic preservation overlay, and certain criteria would just have to be met.
All right, I'm just trying to see where we're at here.
I see a new question. Okay, so could you talk about more about tangible examples of how elements of the current comprehensive plan have been applied to policy and changed the direction of development in Tulsa over the last 10 years? I'm curious what has proved effective or maybe not effective. So from a land use planning perspective, that's where our office is really using the plan. Susan, is that something you could answer?
So this is a big question. Mm-hmm. We had Let me find that question again. We've had a lot of developments that have come through that we've applied the comprehensive plan to. And I don't know that I can, let me find that exactly the wording of that question again.
I can read it to you.
Okay, which is it in the beginning of these questions or?
No, it's the second most recent. So it's,
Okay, good.
tangible
Oh,
example.
I got you. Okay. So, I guess I don't know that any specific example comes to mind of a specific project, but the current comprehensive plan has and I guess I'm thinking about the land use map. We have a land use map and a stability and growth map currently, and the land use map has been helpful sometimes. Sometimes it's not. There's a lot of inconsistencies in that map, just in similar parcels and how they were evaluated, as well as between that map and the stability and growth map. So it hasn't been perfect at all, but it has provided guidance and helped us who makes recommendations to the planning commission and to the and of course to the planning commission and city council. I don't know that I can think of any real tangible examples.
I think Susan, one thing we could add in that vein, not to a specific project, but to a policy direction, was the zoning code. The update of our zoning ordinance that happened in 2018, I believe, I mean, that would be a result of that comprehensive plan adoption and trying to pursue the goals of some of those recommendations within that plan to make sure that we had zoning districts that accommodated the types of development people had asked for and that aligned with some of the recommendations in those land use designations that you find on that plan. So I think with the adoption of that, that's a very large policy change in the city of Tulsa that was a direct result of the comprehensive plan and the update that was done there.
Right, and I guess even just to take from that a more tangible example would be, the mixed use zoning and how we've applied that along the Peoria Avenue BRT corridor to achieve the goals along that corridor and in other parts of town where mixed use is important. That was a recommendation that came out of the comp plan and made its way through to zoning, and we have so many properties now that have sought that zoning, mixed zoning.
Yeah, and even extending on it more, we went into the update of our subdivision and development regulations that also occurred. So those are big ordinance and regulation documents that apply to developments in the city of Tulsa. And as we went through those processes, we were looking for ways to incorporate the recommendations of plan into the regulations we adopted. And I think that led to, overall decreases in some of the parking requirements for certain uses. It adopted new opportunities for zoning like the mixed use. It adopted provisions for neighborhoods that were asked for in order to preserve things like the overlay that we've talked about, that gives neighborhoods an opportunity to try and preserve some of those characteristics that we've identified. And then with the subdivision regulations, we've obviously gone through quite a process to make sure now that we've got sidewalks everywhere in the city of Tulsa. I think that's a direct result of some of those recommendations. We tried to shorten block lengths in new subdivisions to add to connectivity and make sure we have a functioning street network. And obviously implementation of that takes years once it's adopted as we see new development occur. But those are new regulations in place that weren't before, and it puts us in a much better position than we've been in the past.
I just add one thing to that is the BRT routes themselves. Peoria and 21st Street, for example, were identified in the plan as primary transit corridors. And so I think while it may not have originated in Planet Tulsa, it is a common thread through the planning of that time period.
There's a question earlier on directed toward me about just a comment that I had made in our conversations that we've had with other groups outside of just this conversation, development representatives specifically. So just to explain that a little bit more, in our initial research and work that we've done in updating the comprehensive plan and a lot of the things that John already outlined, infill development generally just kind of rose to the surface as an important topic to really look into for Tulsa specifically. Those development trends, again, John showed, I think, paint a pretty picture of what that looks like for Tulsa. And so, as a part of our conversations, much like we want to talk with the folks who live in these neighborhoods, we were also interested to know from the development community if this was something that they're starting to kind of switch tracks a little bit in their development portfolio. Are they looking to do more infill type projects, or are they looking to do still more of your greenfield kind of typical suburban development on the fringes? And from all of those conversations and from the survey itself, and just kind of that reoccurring theme has been that infill more and more has become an interest and opportunity, and I think something that we expect to see moving forward, which is really the reason why we have this conversation, is to drill into that a little bit and talk about what we're hearing and what we're seeing, and be able to get some thoughts and feedback from all of you who have participated in this conversation. So that thus far has kind of been what I meant by conversations with development representatives and their involvement in their perspective for infill within these neighborhoods.
So for the question from Carrie Hartman, I know some cities have dedicated green space between housing areas. Seems like we don't have that anymore. What is the city status on that? So I'm not 100% sure what that's referring to specifically, but in our environment chapter, we're wanting to have recommendations related to preservation of existing natural areas. So that would be things like stream corridors, tree canopy, particularly in places where there's relatively untouched forest, things like that. I think one of the things that separates Tulsa from a lot of cities is how well integrated it is to the natural context. And so that's something that I think is a priority. And we saw that reflected in our survey results, where loss of trees was the number one thing that was of highest concern to all the people who took the survey.
It looks like Pam and also Sharir, you kind of discussed the idea of neighborhoods with historic preservation situations that don't necessarily want an overlay or are not pursuing an overlay for historic preservation as a solution. In the past, really, that is where we've addressed this neighborhood character overlay topic and brought that up for neighborhoods as a tool that can be used to not pursue full historic preservation, but if there are particular identities or components of the neighborhood that should be preserved, to present that as something that could be adopted potentially as that neighborhood character overlay. As I mentioned earlier, when I was explaining that tool to everyone, that came from requests by neighborhoods like you guys are discussing in the chat, who necessarily weren't looking at historic preservation, but who had those components that they'd like to preserve of their neighborhoods. And so there is a tool out there, it is available, but it is, it's a process that has to be done in conjunction with the neighborhood and the property owners within that neighborhood. And there has to be some sort of consensus for them to bring that forward and adopt it on their properties. And if there is a desire to pursue something without all of those neighbors being in consent, the council would be able to do that. But it's one of those things where often, if not everyone in the neighborhood believes that these are the components that should be going through this process, that it doesn't make it as a part of those overlay provisions. But that was the tool that was developed to try and address that situation where people didn't want to pursue historic preservation.
Wanda asked a question about, or maybe kind of just made the comment that there's a concern about how infill will affect property values, and also something about rental property. So just kind of generally speaking, infill as a type of development could be for owners, for renters. There's no real distinction there. As far as how that can affect property values, I think that's something that we hear a lot of, and we try to understand what the reality is. It depends largely on the neighborhoods that you're looking at, specifically the type of development you're talking about specifically. I think there's a lot of factors there to makes it hard to kind of paint with a broad brush and say yes or no, or how much or how little. But definitely something that we've been hearing a lot about, and I think we've developed some general policies within our thinking of the plan to make sure that that's considered, what types of impacts we'll see from that perspective, wanting to make sure that we don't get into the areas of gentrification and, you know, the negative ways that can manifest itself, forcing people to leave neighborhoods involuntarily and those types of things. So definitely a concern that we share, and something that we want to, I think we've started into with the development of our policies in the comp plan.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. Roughly half of Tulsans are renters, and so restrictions on rental properties is a fairly dubious task when we're talking about half of our city's population. So that's, you know, and the fewer rental properties there are, the higher the rent is for that, which can also lead to displacement and gentrification. So these are complex issues that kind of have to be addressed. Yes, specifically neighborhood by neighborhood, but also as a community. So.
Well, it looks like the chat slowed down just a little bit, and I think we do have another goal to discuss. And I think we're probably already beginning to mesh the discussion topic. This is really related more to commercial areas specifically, and how those can complement surrounding uses, in a very similar vein to the transition discussion we were just talking about, but more specifically when talking about commercial development near neighborhoods, what are the primary concerns that neighborhoods share when dealing with that, and then a more expanded question on those transitions, and if you could, and if you have any examples around town where you think that was done appropriately, or even out of town, but somewhere that we could look to for how that could be done better, that's something that we're open to hearing today. So that's kind of another one we want to open up and let people discuss and tell us, you know, what they think or what they've seen, because as we continue to establish this goal and make sure that we're accommodating appropriate development and growth of those areas, we want to make sure that we're taking the neighborhood considerations into effect of how we adopt our regulations and how we review new developments. So it looks like, just even going back to the last question, you know, green space and trees are coming up very frequently in terms of how those could be mitigated, and how that can buffer a little bit better by providing those tree or landscape type screen buffers between development proposals.
And I saw questions related to streetscaping, and those are definitely ideas that we've heard numerous times to be included in the comprehensive plan. You know, streets where they're, you know, ostensibly walkable, but there are no trees to provide shade. It's just not as aesthetically enjoyable as even some of our surrounding communities have, like the Rose District and Broken Arrow. That's a definite deficiency we have right now that we do want to improve on.
In conjunction with the tree discussion, I mean, we did also just recently revise and update our city's tree list to try and address some of those concerns, like Shannon, you've posted in the chat about being a tree that can last and has some longevity, whether it be because of Oklahoma's climate or where it's being planted, but ensuring that what's being planted there is something that can last and actually provide that needed shade or needed desired, whatever the outcome might be. And I think that's something that is ongoing as well. A lot of people don't know that there are requirements specifically between parking lots and rights of way to have street trees in place for certain developments. And so just like any zoning requirement, when people let those things die or when they remove them without permission, they're in violation of a zoning ordinance. And so those are things that need to be known when developments are falling down on what they're supposed to be upkeeping. And of course, the city is going to do their part to try and enforce those rules. Mark, I have seen very similar recommendations from some of our peer cities discussing, how we can make someone preserve a tree or replace a tree with something above and beyond that. I will say, as part of our zoning code update, we did provide at least incentives for preservation of mature trees by allowing them to substitute newly required trees for preserved trees on the lot. That was a step in the right direction that wasn't previously allowed. It was just kind of black and white. You had to install the new trees as they were. And so that helps in some situations to mitigate that removal of some of those mature trees. But I definitely agree that there's more work to be done on that front.
And to Shannon's
ditched.
second part about Bradford pear trees, Shannon, you'll be happy to know that Bradford pears are not permitted to be installed as part of required landscaping for new developments. That's a relatively recent change because you're right, they snap easily in ice and they cause problems. So Bradford pears are no longer allowed to satisfy minimum landscaping requirements.
Craig, I will. I pulled up that Fayetteville tree ordinance, and we will take a look at that.
Jessica, I'll say that we've definitely been trying to get our hands more involved in some of the street projects happening around town and ensuring that some of these recommendations are met in the design of those street projects. And street trees are obviously always a good priority for our office. So I agree. I think, in some of those, especially more urban corridors that we have in our city already, it would be very nice to see installation of some hardy trees as we go through any sort of updates to those streets.
Yeah, and that conversation, I'll just add, extends into our franchise agreements that the city has with public utility companies. So we've been recently working to tackle a lot of those issues and having conversations with representatives from PSO, NG, Cox, AT&T, who else I'm forgetting. But yeah, a lot of the challenges that we've seen and why we maybe don't have some buffering in areas like that, or just generally trees and these types of street projects or otherwise. We're working with those groups to come up with the appropriate solutions to where we can more appropriately provide that adequately. Daniel mentioned the tree list as something that identifies the appropriate tree types, and that's coming from those conversations with the public utility companies and engineering at the city and others who have investment within the public right-of-way and even just outside of the public right-of-way, abutting that area, so that we can do those appropriately and hopefully minimize some of the conflicts that have been concerns in the past.
The example from Jasmine is it's a sort of a suggestion where there is a threshold that isn't very, these are some things that would make it a smoother, safer transition. So things like lighting and art and connectivity is absolutely critical. And Nathan, do you want to kind of explain the sidewalk fee in lieu and how we're using that to better prioritize sidewalk projects?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, going back to when we updated our subdivision regulations, a big topic was the idea of sidewalks and how sidewalks would be required in the city of Tulsa. In the past, you were only required to install sidewalks on your project if you were going through some sort of new subdivision plat or development of that type. And we realized that wasn't accomplishing the goals of, especially a lot of these major infill developments, of actually getting new sidewalks in areas where they were desperately needed. And so we worked in conjunction with the city of Tulsa, Streets and Stormwater Group, as well as Development Services, to eventually adopt an overall sidewalk ordinance that applies to all new construction in the city of Tulsa. And with that ordinance came the ability for developments in certain areas that maybe didn't connect to existing networks, or were, so far removed from any existing sidewalks that they were given the ability to pay a fee in lieu of installing that sidewalk, which essentially gives us the money that would have been cost to install it on that property and lets us put it where we would prioritize it as somewhere more important. We're working still, I believe, with the city's group on their list of sidewalk requests, so we can see where people are trying to get sidewalks installed, and hopefully the use of that money will lead to much better connected sidewalk networks throughout some of our existing neighborhoods where over time either they've deteriorated or they just were never there.
The question from Shannon about flood mitigation planned for the areas that flooded over a year ago, that's a big question that has more than one part to it, really. There's emergency management, and then there's also engineering, both of which have, that the flooding was a bit of a wake-up call in some of the things that we still need to do. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Arkansas River, we're largely at the mercy of the Keystone Dam and the releases from the Army Corps of Engineers. So our primary approach to mitigation of risk in those flood events is evacuation. And so the emergency manager at the city of Tulsa, his plan is to improve communications, making it multilingual, getting new tools to more quickly and readily notify residents in areas that could be inundated, where there's deficiencies along the shore. The engineering services and other departments are working to repair them or kind of buttress them against erosion. They're finding ways to introduce things like gates on outlets into the river that can hold water in the system so as not to overwhelm everything all at once. We are on one stretch of one river in a multi-river system that all channels down eventually, to the Mississippi River. And so we're kind of, part of this broader context, and our response, unfortunately, because of that, we have to focus more on mitigation than solving.
Looks like some good just overall discussion and points being made. I want everybody to know that even if we've not addressed your comments specifically, we are going to obviously take all of this into consideration as we continue to have these discussions, and we appreciate the feedback and some of the examples you guys are providing. So I think we can probably go ahead and move on to our next slide here if we have. So the next part of the discussion is really changing lanes a little bit, getting away from our discussions about development and concerns with that, and more about how you like to receive information. So as Travis showed you earlier, we have our survey results that kind of told us what people prefer to see or how they prefer to receive their information. But we're still often hearing from folks that they're not getting it. So they're not either receiving notices how they think they should, or they feel like the information is not available. And so we obviously want to adopt some policies moving forward, as well as try and make any changes we can to be as transparent as possible and to make sure that people feel like they can get that information from us. So I know that broadly in the survey, we listed like social media and newspaper and some of those concepts, but it would be helpful if we could know directly from you guys, what are the more effective tools that you use, and in context with those tools, what are the actual mechanisms that work? So if it's Facebook where you get your information, are you looking at our group? Are you looking at your neighborhood group? What are the resources on that tool that we can use to better reach you all? Because we want to make sure that we're getting you guys this information. So, and then if, beyond social media, if there's other ideas that you guys have that we should be utilizing or that you've seen used, we obviously are open ears to that as well.
I'm waiting for Daniel to maybe chime in, but to Pam's comment, as far as signing up for specific subjects, getting email address, email invite, that sounds very, very similar to the newsletter that we've recently been putting together. And just the way that we've been attempting to do just that for the subjects or the geographies or what have you that people may be interested in. You can sign up for that in some form and get some of that information. So we can provide a link for how to do that, how to sign up for that. But that's great to hear if that is something that can be utilized more and more.
Yeah, it looks like Daniel went ahead and put a link in the chat so everybody can actually access that and see where you can go sign up. It does look like several folks have mentioned the Facebook page as well. It's worth noting, obviously, we do have our Facebook up and running for the Tulsa Planning Office that you guys can go follow, where we'll post at least our meeting events and things that are going on, just like we've posted all of these ongoing public engagement meetings we have right now. We do frequently work with our city councilors as well when we have issues specific to their districts to share throughout their Facebook pages and their feeds. And we also work with our Working in Neighborhoods department with their existing registered list of neighborhood associations and contact whoever is currently listed as the contact for them.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer the question about the newsletter, I did drop the link into the chat. On there, when you go through the sign up process, you can indicate what topics you're interested in. We're also in the process of starting up a Nextdoor account. We were able to gain access to that just this week and shared a post about the meeting that we're in right now and the 29 additional meetings for the rest of January and February. So we are trying to get into as many different communications avenues as we possibly can, because we completely understand that not everybody has the same communication preferences. So we're trying to do as much as we can.
Looks like a few other social media suggestions like Nextdoor and Slack. I do think we recently made our way onto Nextdoor, if that's right, Daniel.
Yep.
And then let's see, Jamie's giving Daniel well-deserved kudos for the work he's doing on all this outreach and making sure people are aware of that. I do agree. I think, the nonprofits are a good opportunity for us to potentially find new avenues to reach out to different communities. So that's a good suggestion.
Yes, and that was something we did do on this survey. So we were able to look at previous survey results from the city and kind of identify areas where difficulties were occurring. And so we did reach out to groups in those areas. I think we still have a lot of room for improvement there, but that is something that we're pursuing, recognizing that there are groups and individuals who have networks that we could tap into to spread the word on things. As far as reaching out to tribes, we have met with with the Osage, with the Cherokee, and with the Muskogee Creek through the process of the comprehensive plan update, particularly to talk about economic development activities and where we might be able to strike partnerships. So that's where we are, and we want to make sure that we're acknowledging our tribal partners when we work on projects. That's something that was emphasized, that like the relationship between the city and the tribes or planning department and the tribes, they want to be a part and want to be recognized. And so we're going to be really putting an effort in to do that.
Craig, I think your idea is something that is very interesting, one, for the requirement on the developer. I know not exactly what you're recommending, but in the same vein, we have tried to make some improvements recently, and I think we're looking to make more on some of those public notices that do go out on certain developments. But yeah, the idea of having some sort of actual visual representation of what's being proposed or being done versus a wall of text could certainly be helpful. I would agree. All right, looks like that one's kind of kind of slowed down as well. I don't know, do we have another question slide, or was that our final question for discussion all around? Nope. So really just a re-review of some more opportunities. Obviously, we've thrown a lot of stuff at you all tonight. We wouldn't expect you to be able to give us all your feedback in one night. This is a lot to digest. So we wanted to make you all aware of the multiple opportunities that you have to share information with us or ideas that you have. As you think about some of the information that we presented to you today and kind of think about that format we've discussed of having goals and strategies that we'd like to adopt as part of this comprehensive plan. This is really the chance for you guys to make an impact on that and to provide us with things that really impact your neighborhood. And so these are all those options. This is just a repeat of the slide we showed you earlier.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there are a lot of really great ideas flowing through this chat, and I know it could probably be frustrating just to type them out. So if you're more of a talker, come to these Zoom sessions. You'll get to have conversations about these. If you leave a voicemail, obviously you won't, email you won't, or survey you won't. But we, given the circumstances, we wanted to have an opportunity to have as close to face-to-face interactions as we could, given safety measures.
And John, those are going to be really kind of one-on-one conversations, right? So opportunities for people to really kind of chat with us and talk about those issues.
Yeah, it'll be one-on-one if you come alone, but if you join the Zoom meeting with some friends and you want to, or family or whomever, colleagues, and you'd like to be in a group together, we can accommodate that in a breakout session. So you don't have to do it alone either. You can bring a friend.
Pam, for your question, well, actually, Jamie, I think you were first. Yeah, I think we are planning to provide you all with the slides as well as a recording of the meeting if you want to go back and look at anything we talked about, or if you desire to listen to us talk again. And then for Pam's question on the documents, that will be a part of that process that John shared earlier. So obviously there will be an initial draft that goes out and everyone will have a chance to review and provide feedback. And then before even adoption, there's a second opportunity for everyone to review what's being proposed by our office in that document. So just stay tuned to our office to see updates as this process goes on, and you'll be able to participate in those. Jacqueline Bowman, you said about adding new housing in existing neighborhoods. I definitely recommend maybe checking out the Housing in Neighborhoods listening session to share some of your ideas, but also if you do check out our Facebook, pay attention to when the missing middle discussions are going on, and you'll be able to see at least a micro level discussion about that pertaining to some specific neighborhoods near downtown, and how we're going to potentially try to address that in the future. Some more ideas. Nathan, you provided an idea related to our transitional areas and the areas between certain uses. I don't think anyone brought up the idea of using retention ponds for that separation, but I think that's a really good idea and something we could definitely consider.
Yeah, I would say that's a new idea for me too.
Right. I mean, that would be a good use for something that already has to be there anyway, and would provide a pretty good buffer. I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think maybe just to kind of respond a little bit on that, we need to think one of the so for development projects require on-site detention. They do have an option to potentially kind of waive some of those requirements or pay fee in lieu of, and some different options there. So that'd be a good conversation to have with our development services team and engineering as well, to think through that a little bit, because yeah, that could be an important consideration for something else for buffering separation.
To Aaron's question about working in neighborhoods, we have been meeting with and working in neighborhoods across this plan. In terms of discussing the performance of working in neighborhoods, no, I don't think that's what the listening sessions are necessarily for. If there are specific complaints you have, I would encourage you to reach out to the Working in Neighborhoods Department directly or go through 311.
Jacqueline, you've got a couple things in here about new projects in neighborhoods not matching existing neighborhood covenants. It's important to draw a distinction between what is a private neighborhood covenant to be enforced by neighbors living in that subdivision versus a regulation or an ordinance that's going to be enforced by the city of Tulsa. I think there's probably many different examples of where things have been constructed that are in conflict with some adopted covenant that the neighborhood has in place, but the city, when they're doing their review, is not going to be checking those private agreements that exist on that lot. Those would be enforceable only by someone else in that subdivision. If you think of it like a contract between neighbors who live in that subdivision, that's what they're agreeing to with each other. The city's not a party to that agreement. And so the enforcement of those is solely on the folks that have entered that agreement with one another and can then say, hey, you've breached this contract we have with each other. I don't know. I think we only had maybe just a question slider. We have our contact information that we want to share, but it looks like we've kind of started to address everyone in here. Oh, so a final little brief on some places you can go. I think several of these links have been shared throughout the night in the chat, but here they are again, just for you all to be able to locate us and all the different places that we're existing and where you can get the information from us. And then we'll give you a little bit here to kind of take that notes. And then I think the next slide will have our actual individual contact info for you guys as well. So with that, I don't know if Susan or Travis, if you guys have anything you'd like to say in closing or.
Well, I want to say thanks everybody for bearing with us through the Zoom bombing. That was the first and worst experience with that I've ever had. So thanks for attending and participating. I feel like we had a lot of good participation, and I really do hope a lot of you will come to the listening sessions, participate not just on housing and neighborhoods, but all the different topics. You know, we've got them on economic development. We've got Parks and Rec, like I said, you know, all these different things. And spread the word, tell your friends, tell your family. We'd love to have them come and participate.
And please don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions. We provide our phone numbers and emails very intentionally. So let us know if you want to talk a little bit more about any of these topics or anything else. We're happy to be a resource to you.
Mine's not on there, but it is on the website. So if you, I'm one of the few John Tankards on earth, so I'm pretty easy to find.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up all that we have for everybody. Unless anyone has some last minute questions they want to plug in, we'll all hang out here for just a little bit more. But otherwise, we appreciate the participation and look forward to hearing from you guys on more of this stuff. So